Everyone stood as the music swelled, and Clara tightened her grip on the bouquet to stop her hands from shaking. The lace train of her ivory gown brushed the church aisle, delicate and beautiful, unlike the heavy brace on her right ankle, hidden beneath the fabric, or the way her stride faltered with every step. She was 7 months pregnant. And limping. Each movement was a war between pain and pride. Her father should have been walking beside her, but he'd passed 2 years ago. And Jonah, the man waiting at the altar, had insisted on a solo walk. "You're strong," he'd said. "Own it." She hadn't realized until now that maybe he'd meant, "Show them what a burden you are." Half the guests already stared with pity. The other half whispered behind gloved hands. Clara focused on Jonah's face at the end of the aisle. But he wasn't smiling. He wasn't even meeting her eyes. He looked down. Then away. Then he stepped back. A murmur rippled through the pews. Clara's breath caught. She slowed, heart pounding, limping forward one more step before stopping entirely. "Jonah?" she said softly, the name barely audible. He turned to the priest and said something she couldn't hear, then turned back to her and shook his head. "I can't," he called out, voice sharp and clear. "I can't do this, not like this." The silence that followed was devastating. Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her. She stood there in her white gown, visibly pregnant, one heel slightly lifted because she couldn't bear pressure on her right foot. No one moved. Then Jonah did. He turned and walked away. Right down the side aisle, through the vestry door, out of the church. The priest said her name, tried to reach for her. But Clara backed away. She clutched the bouquet so hard the stems snapped. The whispers turned to gasps, rustling fabric, phones raised. "She's limping," someone said. "He couldn't handle it. Poor girl. And pregnant too?" Clara couldn't breathe. She took one step, then another, and stumbled. The pain shot up her leg like fire. Her bouquet hit the floor. She grabbed the edge of a pew to steady herself. And that's when a voice, firm, deep, familiar, cut through the silence. "Clara!" She turned sharply. The crowd parted near the back. A man stepped forward, late 30s, tall, in a dark blue suit that didn't quite fit the occasion. His face held something between panic and purpose. "Clara," he said again, louder. "It's me." Her mind spun. She hadn't seen that face in years, not since college, not since the accident. "Nathan," she whispered, stunned. He moved fast, up the aisle toward her, past stunned guests and a priest too shocked to intervene. "You shouldn't be alone," he said gently, reaching for her elbow. "Not now, not like this." She stared at him, blinking hard, confusion mixing with tears. "Why are you here?" "Because I've been looking for you," he said, "and because I promised myself, if you ever needed someone, I wouldn't be too late again." He slipped his arm under hers, steadying her. She let him. The whispers swelled again, but now they carried a different tone. She felt them burn across her skin. Who was he? Why did he care? But Clara didn't care. Her legs were trembling. Her lungs were tight. Her heart, shattered and confused, clung to the one solid thing in front of her. "Let's go," he said softly. "You don't have to stay here for them." She nodded. Wordlessly. And together they walked back down the aisle, she limping, he steady, through the same doors Jonah had just disappeared through. But this time, the world was watching for a different reason. The bridal gown hung loose around Clara's shoulders as Nathan helped her into the passenger seat of his dusty sedan, the plastic dry cleaner cover he'd grabbed, shielding her from curious eyes, still peering out of the church windows. She hadn't said a word since they left, and neither had he. Not until they reached the edge of town, and the silence became unbearable. "Do you want me to take you somewhere specific?" he asked gently, eyes still on the road. "Or should I just drive?" Clara swallowed hard, her voice cracking. "Anywhere but there." Nathan nodded. He took the long road west toward the county line, where open land and quiet filled in the gaps. He remembered she used to like the quiet. Back when life wasn't so heavy, when her laugh used to catch him off guard. But now she stared out the window, one hand resting on the curve of her belly, the other clenched tightly in her lap. Her bouquet was still in the back seat, crushed and wilting. He finally broke the silence. "I saw your name in a fundraiser post a few weeks ago. The community center. They mentioned you by name. Clara Eastman, volunteer coordinator." I nearly dropped my coffee. She turned her head slightly. "So you came all this way just to crash my wedding?" "No," he said quietly. "I came to tell you I was sorry. For not being there. For disappearing when you needed me most." She looked at him then. Really looked. Same dark eyes, same worried furrow between his brows. But older now. Weathered. "You didn't disappear," she said finally. "I pushed you away." "Because you were in pain," he replied, "and I let you." The air between them stretched thin. Clara looked down at her hand, flexed it slowly. "I didn't expect anyone to stay. After the accident, after the limp started, after the baby." Her voice trailed off. "Jonah only saw what made him uncomfortable, not what I'd survived." "I see what you've survived," Nathan said. "And I still see you." Her breath caught. She wasn't sure if it was grief or relief or just exhaustion. But her shoulders slumped, her whole body sinking into the seat like the weight had finally won. "I loved him," she said, her voice small. "I thought he loved me too." "He loved who he thought you'd stay," Nathan said gently. "Not who you've become." They drove in silence for another mile until Nathan pulled off the road at an overlook with a wooden bench and a view of the valley below. He turned off the engine but didn't move. "You want to talk about it?" "Which part?" she asked bitterly. "The fact that he made me walk alone so he didn't have to explain why I limp? The fact that I stayed because I didn't think anyone else ever would?" Her voice cracked. "Or the part where I realized, the moment he walked away, that maybe he'd been leaving me for months. I was just too afraid to see it?" Nathan didn't answer. He just reached over slowly and rested his hand near hers on the center console, not touching, just close enough that if she wanted to, she could close the gap. She did. Her fingers slid over his, unsure and trembling. "I can't go back to that house," she whispered. "Everything in it was his. Every promise, every baby plan, every ultrasound photo. It's all stained now." "Then don't go back," he said softly. "Come with me, for now, just for a while. No pressure, no expectations. Just safety." Clara stared at him. "Nathan, I'm pregnant." "I know. I'm still healing from surgery. I wake up at night crying. I walk like I'm broken." "I know," he said again, "and I'm still here." Her eyes filled, but she blinked them clear. "Why now?" He looked out across the valley, his voice steady. "Because I promised myself, if I ever saw you again, I wouldn't waste it. Because I still remember the girl who used to draw constellations in chalk on the sidewalk and read medical journals for fun. And because when someone limps their way down an aisle alone, they shouldn't have to walk back alone too." Clara looked down at her belly. The baby shifted beneath her hand. A quiet flutter. A reminder. Of life. Of everything still possible. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "Just for a while." Nathan started the car again and pulled back onto the road. She didn't know where they were going. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel lost. Nathan pulled into the gravel driveway of a small guest cottage, tucked behind a larger farmhouse on the edge of town. The wooden porch sagged slightly, but flower pots still lined the railing, and sunlight filtered through wind chimes that tinkled gently in the breeze. Clara looked out the window, her throat tight. "This yours?" "Belongs to my sister," Nathan said, stepping out. "She's out of town till next week. Said I could use it if I ever needed space. Figured now's the time." He opened the door and helped her out, careful with her hand, her gait, her balance. She didn't say much, hadn't since they left the overlook. But her silence wasn't the same brittle quiet she'd held earlier. This one felt like a shell cracking, slow and reluctant. Inside, the cottage was warm. Sunlight spilled across faded quilts and worn-in furniture, everything touched by the kind of comfort that didn't try to impress. Clara sat gingerly on the couch and exhaled, like she hadn't done it all day. Her swollen ankle throbbed, her back ached, and her face felt stiff from holding it together. Nathan disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a glass of water, placing it on the coffee table beside her. "You hungry?" She shook her head. "Tired?" She nodded, but she didn't move. Her hands remained clenched in her lap, her jaw tight. Nathan knelt down beside her. Not close, just enough to lower his voice. "You're safe now, Clara. You can take the armor off." And just like that, the tears came. Silent at first, then gasping, then full, wrenching sobs that made her shoulders shake and her fingers tremble. She curled in on herself, trying to hide it, but Nathan didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just stayed there, steady, while everything inside her poured out. Rage, shame, loss, confusion. She cried for the aisle, for the whispers, for the man who left, and the girl who kept trying to be enough. She cried for every doctor who'd warned her she might never carry a baby to term, and for the miracle now growing inside her anyway. For the limp she couldn't hide. For the love she'd handed over so freely to someone who backed away the moment she needed him to reach forward. And Nathan stayed. Not touching. Not interrupting. Just witnessing. When the storm quieted, she reached for the tissue box on the end table and wiped her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered hoarsely. "I didn't mean to fall apart." "You didn't fall apart," he said gently. "You opened a valve. That's different." Clara gave a weak laugh and leaned back into the cushions. "You always did talk like a therapist." "I studied psych for 2 semesters, he said, grinning, before switching to business and hating every minute of it. She smiled. Really smiled. It felt strange on her face. Unused muscles tugging into a shape she'd almost forgotten. "You remember that night on campus?" she said slowly. "After I failed anatomy? You brought pizza and told me I wasn't allowed to cry unless I also threw something." "You threw a stapler at my head," he recalled. "Still have a dent in my ego." She let her head rest against the cushion, staring at the ceiling. "I don't know how I got here, Nathan. I thought I was doing everything right. I settled. I tried to be enough. I thought if I didn't ask for too much, I wouldn't get abandoned again." "He didn't leave because you asked too much," Nathan said, serious now. "He left because he saw your strength and it made him feel small. That's on him, not you." She let the words settle into her. They felt foreign, heavy, like something she wasn't ready to believe, but needed to hear anyway. "And you?" she asked. "What do you see?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "I see the strongest woman I've ever known, holding everything together with shaking hands, and still showing up anyway." Her eyes filled again, but this time she didn't look away. She let him see the tears. She let herself be seen. And in that fragile space, something shifted. Not everything, but something. I don't know what's next, she whispered. I don't even know who I am without the wedding, without the plan. Then maybe we don't plan anything yet, Nathan said. Maybe we just breathe, one day at a time. She nodded slowly. One day at a time. That night, Clara slept in the guest bedroom, curled around a body pillow, the scent of clean sheets and old cedar calming her nerves. Nathan slept on the couch, a book unopened in his lap, the weight of the day settling into his bones. Neither of them knew where this road was going. But for the first time in a long time, neither of them was walking it alone. The next morning brought sun through the window panes and the smell of fresh coffee from the kitchen. Clara stirred slowly beneath the patchwork quilt, her body sore but rested. She reached for her phone out of habit and found it blank. No texts, no missed calls, not even from Jonah. A strange kind of emptiness filled her chest. Not longing, not hope, just silence. She rose carefully, her limp heavier after a night of stillness, and padded toward the kitchen. Nathan was already there, dressed in a plain tee and jeans, humming quietly while frying eggs. He looked up when she entered, his smile warm. You slept through the birds. That's a good sign. She nodded. I needed it. He plated food for them both and poured orange juice, setting the table like he'd done it 100 times before. It was simple, kind, easy, nothing she had to earn. They ate mostly in silence, and Clara was grateful for that. Nathan didn't poke, he didn't pry. He just existed beside her in a way that made her feel a little more human. But the moment shattered when a loud knock rattled the front door. Clara froze. Fork mid-air. Nathan's expression tightened as he rose and crossed the room. He peered through the side window, then turned to her. It's your mother. Clara blinked. Seriously? He nodded once. Want me to send her away? Clara stood slowly. Number let me handle it. When she opened the door, her mother's expression said everything. Concern laced with poorly masked judgment, lips pressed thin, arms folded. She wore pearls and a cardigan, as if she'd dressed for war. Clara. Mom, may I come in? Depends. Are you here for me or for damage control? Her mother hesitated. People are talking. I just want to understand what happened. Clara stepped aside, gesturing toward the small living room. Her mother entered but didn't sit. He left, Clara said flatly. Right, there in the church. Because I limped. Her mother sighed as if the limp were a personal insult. You could have worn flats or chosen a different dress, something more forgiving. Clara's jaw clenched. He didn't leave because of the shoes. He left because I stopped pretending to be perfect. You're pregnant, Clara, her mother whispered sharply. You needed that marriage. No, Clara replied, louder now. I needed safety. I needed support, not a man who saw my disability as an embarrassment. You don't have to be so dramatic, her mother hissed. Do you think this is how a child should enter the world, fatherless? Clara's hand went instinctively to her belly. No, she said. I think this child should enter the world seeing its mother stand up for herself, for once. Her mother opened her mouth, but Nathan stepped in quietly from the hallway. Ms. Eastman, he said calmly, would you like a coffee to go? She stared at him, bristling. Who are you again? Someone who cares about Clara's peace, he replied evenly, and someone who's not going to let guilt get poured like concrete over her shoulders. Clara watched her mother's face twist, then harden. You've always needed rescuing, she muttered to Clara. Maybe now you'll finally see where that gets you. She turned and walked out. The door clicked shut like a verdict. Clara stood frozen for a moment before letting out a long, shaky breath. "She didn't used to be like that," she said softly. "She used to read to me at night, sing when I was sick. She just, I don't know. Somewhere along the line, disappointment replaced affection." Nathan stepped closer. "People can't handle what they haven't healed. Doesn't mean you have to carry their weight." Clara looked at him, eyes wet but steady. "Thank you. For that." "For what?" "For not rescuing me. For just standing beside me while I rescued myself." He smiled then, soft, proud. "Anytime." That afternoon, Clara opened a journal she hadn't touched in months. She began to write, not poetry, not plans, just truth, memories, fears, the flutter of the baby beneath her ribs, the ache in her foot, the echo of the church and the sound of Nathan calling her name. The past had come knocking. And this time, she hadn't opened the door with her head bowed. She'd looked it straight in the eye. The limp was still there. So was the wound. But now, so was the fight. The appointment had been booked weeks earlier, back when Clara still believed she'd be married by now, with Jonah at her side, grinning nervously in the exam room and holding her hand. But instead, she sat alone in the waiting area of the OB/GYN clinic, gently rubbing her belly as the receptionist called out her name. "Clara Eastman?" She stood, steadying her balance, her limp slow but sure. The nurse gave her a kind smile and led her down a narrow hallway. "We'll be doing your second trimester anatomy scan today. 28 weeks, right?" "Yes," Clara said, breathless. "Boy or girl?" I didn't want to know. I wanted it to be a surprise." The nurse smiled again. "Still can be." The lights dimmed as Clara lay back on the table, heart racing. The machine came to life with a quiet whir, and the technician spread warm gel across her abdomen. The image flickered onto the monitor, blurry at first, then crystal clear. Clara gasped. There it was, a tiny profile, a nose, a hand raised like a wave. The baby moved, turning slowly, strong and alive. "Looks healthy," the tech said gently. "Want to hear the heartbeat?" Clara nodded, unable to speak. The sound came through, fast, rhythmic, perfect. It filled the room like music. Her throat tightened. She hadn't realized how badly she needed to hear that, how deeply she'd been carrying not just hope, but fear. "Everything's measuring well," the technician continued. "I'll print a few images for you." Clara took the black and white printouts with shaking fingers. Her baby, still growing, still fighting, still here. When she stepped back into the waiting room, Nathan was already there. He stood up the moment he saw her. "How'd it go?" "It's okay," she said, voice breaking. "The baby's okay." She walked straight into his arms and let herself rest there for a moment. No panic, no hesitation. Just breathe. Later that afternoon, back at the cottage, Clara taped one of the ultrasound photos above her bed. She sat for a long time staring at it, her hand resting gently over the curve of her stomach. "You don't know it yet," she whispered. "But you saved me, little one. I thought your arrival would complete a perfect life. Instead, you made me strong enough to build a new one." Nathan walked in holding 2 mugs of tea. He paused when he saw her. "You okay?" She nodded. More than okay. He sat beside her. She handed him one of the printouts. "Still don't want to know the gender?" "Not yet," she said, smiling. "I like the mystery. For once, I don't need all the answers." They sipped their tea in silence, both gazing at the tiny image taped to the wall. The world outside the cottage had started buzzing. Clara's wedding walk had been filmed by someone and quietly leaked. The clip was already circulating through whispered social media channels. Pregnant bride rejected at the altar. Limping woman walks alone until stranger stands up. No names, no credits. Just the haunting image of Clara stopping mid-aisle, then turning as a man called her name. She'd tried not to look at it, but Liz had warned her it was gaining attention. "You might want to get ahead of it," Liz said over the phone. "If people are going to tell your story, make sure it's your truth, not their version." Clara wasn't ready yet, but she was thinking about it. The next day, her doctor called. "We reviewed your ultrasound, and while everything looks good, there is some minor concern about your gait and pelvic tension from the limp. I'd recommend we get you into physical therapy. You'll be carrying extra weight in your 3rd trimester. It's going to strain everything." Clara nodded, already expecting it. "Okay, set it up." "Also," the doctor said hesitantly, "we'd like to schedule a precautionary MRI. Not urgent, just thorough." Clara hung up and immediately felt the fear crawl back in. More appointments, more unknowns. She looked down at her leg, the scar along her ankle still pink and raised. The accident had never fully healed. She'd learned to move forward, not to stop limping. That night, Nathan found her outside on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring up at the stars. "You look like someone who just read a spoiler to their own story." She smiled faintly. "They want more tests. Might be complications, maybe nothing." He sat beside her. "I'll drive you. Wait outside. Wait inside. Bring snacks. Make bad jokes. Whatever you need." She leaned against him. "You keep doing that," she murmured. "Doing what?" "Standing next to me without trying to fix me." Nathan didn't say anything. He just looked at her. The tired eyes, the healing body, the fierce grace she didn't yet recognize in herself, and whispered, "I'm just glad I got the chance." Clara hadn't meant to cry again, but by the time she reached the car after her first physical therapy session, the tears had already welled up behind her eyes. She didn't sob, didn't fall apart. She just sat in the passenger seat, her muscles burning, her pride cracked, and let silent tears roll down her cheeks as Nathan started the car and said nothing. He'd waited for her the entire hour, flipping through an old paperback, sipping coffee, and glancing at the door every time it creaked. He didn't ask how it went. He didn't offer a silver lining or force optimism down her throat. He simply reached over and offered a folded napkin from the glove box. Clara wiped her eyes without apology. "They said I've got scar tissue that might never fully loosen. I'll probably always favor the right leg." Nathan nodded, watching the road. "So what?" "So I'll always limp, and people will always look." "Then let them look," he said quietly. "Let them see a woman who got knocked down and kept moving anyway." Clara stared out the window, his words sitting heavy in her chest. Not like a burden, but like a truth she'd always known and never said aloud. When they got back to the cottage, she moved slower than usual, her body stiff and uncooperative. She collapsed onto the couch with a groan and didn't fight him when he placed a heating pad behind her lower back. "You don't have to wait on me," she said softly. "I'm not expecting it." "I know," he replied. "I'm not doing it because you expect it. I'm doing it because I want to. Even now. When I'm slow? When I wince just walking across a room?" He looked at her then, not pitying, not placating, just steady. Especially now. She looked away, but her hand found his, resting beside her. "You were always like this, gentle when the world wasn't." Nathan smiled faintly. "I had a good teacher." She shook her head. "You had a broken girl with more fear than faith." "And still," he said, "you taught me more about courage than anyone else ever did." They sat like that for a while, the warmth of the heating pad and the weight of everything unspoken softening the edges of the day. Later, he cooked a simple dinner, soup and grilled cheese. And when she tried to help, he gently steered her back to the couch. "Doctor's orders," he teased. "You're off your feet for the next 90 minutes. Is that a medical recommendation or a Nathan one? Both. I'm deeply qualified in both. She smiled despite herself. That night, after dishes and tea and one too many reruns of a cooking show neither of them liked, Clara stood awkwardly by the hallway. "You don't have to sleep on the couch again," she said, her voice low. "You can take the spare room. It's cleaner now, less haunted." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" She nodded. "Just leave the door open a little." He did. She lay in bed for hours that night, the baby shifting gently, her muscles sore but her spirit oddly still. She stared at the ceiling and thought of the aisle, of Jonah's back as he walked away, of the gasps and whispers that had followed her limp like shadows. But now, when she imagined that moment, it wasn't just her own voice in the silence. It was Nathan's, calling her name like a rope thrown across water, like someone reminding her she didn't have to drown. In the middle of the night, a soft knock tapped against her door. "You awake?" Nathan's voice was barely a whisper. "Yeah." He stepped halfway in. "Sorry, I just had a thought and didn't want to forget." She propped herself up. "What kind of thought?" "I think," he said carefully, "you're the bravest person I've ever known. And I think maybe, if it's okay, I'd like to stay a little longer." She blinked, her throat tightening. "You already are." He smiled, nodded once, and stepped back into the hallway. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Nathan." The door stayed open. Not wide, just enough. And that night, for the first time since her world split open, Clara slept deeply, not because everything was fixed, but because someone had finally shown her she didn't have to fix it all alone. The family court building smelled like old paper and nerves. Clara sat on the hard bench outside courtroom 2B, her paperwork clutched in one hand, her other hand resting protectively over her belly. She wore a modest gray dress and flats, easier on her foot, though the limp remained. She'd applied makeup that morning, but it hadn't done much to hide the exhaustion beneath her eyes. She was here to file for sole custody. Not because Jonah had asked for it, but because he hadn't. Since walking out of the church, he hadn't called once. Not to ask if she was okay, not to ask about the baby, not even to demand his ring back. It was like she'd been erased. And that silence had carved deeper than any insult. But Miriam, her attorney, had advised her. Silence today can turn into leverage tomorrow. File now. Control the narrative. The judge's clerk appeared, clipboard in hand. "Clara Eastman?" She stood carefully, steeling her nerves. "Yes." "You're up next. Representing yourself?" "Yes." The words tasted foreign. Brave. Terrifying. As she stepped into the courtroom, the gravity of it all hit her like a wave. This wasn't about shame anymore. It wasn't even about Jonah. It was about her child, about making sure the past didn't come crawling back years from now with claims of ownership or regret. The judge, an older woman with gentle eyes but no tolerance for theatrics, glanced over her file. "Ms. Eastman, I see you're filing for sole legal and physical custody with no intent to list the father." Clara nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you have any evidence supporting the absence of the father or his abandonment?" "He left me at the altar," she said clearly. 7 months pregnant, in front of over 100 people, and he hasn't contacted me since." The judge raised an eyebrow. "That'll suffice for now?" Clara exhaled. The hearing was quick, procedural. She answered every question with poise, even as her leg throbbed beneath her. And then, just as the judge was preparing to finalize the hearing, a door opened at the back of the courtroom. Nathan stepped in. Dressed in a simple button-down and slacks, he stood tall and still, not drawing attention, just watching. Clara's breath caught in her throat. He didn't wave, didn't interrupt. He just showed up, for her, again. The judge glanced up. "You have a support person?" Clara nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge returned to her paperwork. "Then let's proceed." When it was over, the clerk handed her the stamped petition. "You'll receive confirmation in the mail. For now, temporary sole custody is in place." Clara stepped into the hallway, her legs shaking. Not from pain this time, but from the emotional weight of what she'd just done. She had taken her child's future into her own hands, without backup, without begging, without breaking. Nathan met her by the exit, eyes soft. "Did I miss it?" "You caught the ending," she said, managing a faint smile. "It was quiet. No fireworks." "Still the bravest thing I've seen all year," he said. They walked to the parking lot together in silence. Once inside the car, Nathan didn't ask questions. He didn't offer advice. He just turned the key and waited until she was ready to speak. "He didn't even show," she said finally. "Not that I thought he would. But part of me hoped, for the baby's sake, that he'd care enough to at least pretend." Nathan gripped the wheel, jaw tight. Cowards don't change. They just find new places to hide. Clara turned to him. "Why are you here?" "Because every time something hard comes up, I think about what it means to stay. And I want to be the man who stays." She didn't speak for a long time, just watched the trees pass as he drove, the soft hum of the road lulling her into a strange calm. When they pulled up to the cottage, Nathan reached into his pocket. "I want to show you something." He handed her a folded sheet of paper, an old notebook page, edges curled, handwriting slanted. She unfolded it slowly. It was a letter. Dated years ago. Written by her. "Nathan, you're the only person who sees me even when I try to disappear. That's terrifying and safe. I wish I could let you in. But right now the broken parts are louder than the hopeful ones. Maybe someday I'll learn how to reach back." She blinked, stunned. "You kept this?" "You slipped it into my backpack before you left school. I didn't understand it then. I do now." Her fingers trembled as she folded it again. "Why bring it up now?" "Because I think someday is here," he said quietly. "But only if you want it to be." Clara nodded slowly. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I think I do." She didn't reach for him, didn't kiss him, didn't promise anything, but in her heart a door creaked open, and this time she didn't slam it shut. It happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, just after the rain. Clara sat on the porch, swaddled in a soft blanket, sipping peppermint tea as the scent of wet earth drifted through the open air. The cottage felt unusually still. Nathan had gone into town to pick up groceries and a package from Liz. Clara had been alone for only 20 minutes, but long enough to notice something was off. She hadn't felt the baby move. Normally, the baby danced when she drank tea or shifted position. Small kicks, gentle rolls. But today, nothing. She set the cup down slowly, her fingers beginning to tremble. Maybe the baby was asleep. Maybe it was just quiet today. Still, she pressed her hand against the curve of her stomach and whispered, "Hey, little one, you with me?" No answer. No flutter. Her breath quickened. She stood, gently shifting her weight, adjusting her position. She lay on her left side. Nothing. Rolled slightly forward. Still nothing. A drop of panic crept into her throat like smoke. She reached for her phone and called her OB clinic. "I'm 29 weeks, she said shakily. I haven't felt movement for a couple hours." The nurse on the line responded quickly, voice calm but firm. "Come in. Right now. We'll check everything." Clara grabbed her bag, keys, phone, and the printed ultrasound picture still taped to the wall. As she stepped outside, Nathan's car pulled into the driveway. She met him halfway, eyes wide. "We have to go. The baby's not moving." He didn't hesitate, didn't speak, just took the keys from her hand and guided her to the car. The drive was silent but heavy. Nathan gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. Clara stared out the window, her thoughts running faster than her heart. What if something's wrong? What if I did something? What if my limp, the stress, the fall months ago, all of it? What if it finally caught up to me? At the hospital, the nurse rushed them into a triage room. Clara changed into a gown with trembling fingers. The doctor arrived moments later, her expression serious but gentle. "Let's find that heartbeat, okay?" Gel. Probe silence. Then, there it was. That fast, galloping rhythm. Strong. Alive. Clara burst into tears, unable to stop the flood of relief that surged through her. Nathan, sitting beside the bed, exhaled audibly for the first time in 20 minutes. The doctor smiled softly. "Looks like baby just shifted into a position where you can't feel the movement as much. But everything looks perfect. No signs of distress. We'll monitor for another hour to be sure, but for now, you can breathe." Clara laughed through her tears. "Too late. I already forgot how." Nathan reached over and took her hand, and for once, she didn't flinch from comfort. She leaned into it. An hour later, as they sat waiting for discharge papers, Nathan rubbed the back of his neck and said, "Can I tell you something without scaring you?" She looked at him cautiously. "You can try." He smiled. "Today scared the hell out of me, not just because of the baby, but because I realized something." He paused. "I don't want to keep showing up for you as a maybe. I want to be a permanent." Her heart skipped. "Nathan, I'm not asking for a decision," he added quickly. "I just want you to know, whatever this becomes, whatever you're willing to give me, I'm in. Not because you need saving, not because you're pregnant, but because you're the only person I've ever looked at and thought, this is the place I want to stay." Clara's eyes welled again, but this time the tears weren't from fear. They were from something gentler, something rooted. She squeezed his hand and nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's figure out how to stay." They returned to the cottage that night in a soft, tired kind of silence. Clara fell asleep quickly, her hand resting on the spot where she had once feared she'd felt nothing. But now, there was life again. A kick, a roll, a pulse of possibility. And just before drifting off, she whispered to the growing child inside her, "You scared me today, but I get it now. You were just reminding me what matters most." Clara was folding laundry on the porch bench when Nathan stepped out of the cottage with something wrapped in an old brown cloth. He held it like it was delicate, like it mattered, and when he sat beside her, he didn't speak right away. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows over the gravel drive, and the quiet between them felt warm, earned. She looked over at him with a soft smile and said, "You look like you're about to propose or confess to a crime." Nathan gave a short laugh, the kind that didn't reach his eyes yet. "Nothing that dramatic, but I do want to give you something. Something you gave up a long time ago." She raised an eyebrow as he unwrapped the cloth slowly, revealing a small sketchbook, weathered, frayed at the edges, the elastic strap half snapped. Clara stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. "Where did you get that?" "You left it in the art studio your last semester," he said quietly. "Back when you stopped showing up to class after the accident. I found it under your easel. I was going to give it back, but then you disappeared, and I held on to it, thinking maybe one day." Clara reached for it with trembling hands. The moment her fingers touched the cover, memories flooded in. Charcoal on her skin, the smell of turpentine, late nights sketching under fluorescent lights, the thrill of lines turning into something more. She opened it slowly. Page after page of her old drawings stared back at her. Portraits, silhouettes, anatomical studies, flowers, hands in prayer, feet in motion. And then, near the middle, a rough pencil sketch of a woman sitting alone on a hospital bench, head bowed, one leg stretched out with a brace along the ankle. Her eyes welled. "I drew this after the first surgery," she whispered. "I'd just been told I might never walk without help. I thought if I could draw the pain, I could contain it." Nathan nodded. "You did more than contain it. You made it beautiful." She turned to another page, a series of fast, unfinished sketches of a man's profile. Her pencil strokes had softened toward the end, like she hadn't wanted to stop drawing him. "You," she murmured. He gave a quiet smile. "I remember when you used to pretend I was just a reference model." "You never let me pay you," she said. "You said your payment was the pizza after." "Best pizza I ever earned," he replied. She closed the sketchbook and held it against her chest like something fragile rediscovered. "I forgot who I was before the limp," she said. "Before the pregnancy. Before Jonah. I let it all get buried under trying to survive." "Then dig it up," he said softly. "Start again. Start with this. Start with whatever you want. But don't pretend the girl who made this doesn't still live in you." Clara didn't answer right away. She just looked out across the field beyond the cottage, the air golden and thick with summer, dusk. Then she whispered, "I think I stopped believing I deserved anything that didn't come with pain." Nathan leaned in, just close enough for her to feel it, but not crowding her. "Then maybe the bravest thing you can do now is accept what doesn't hurt." She closed her eyes. For a long time, she didn't speak. Then she said, "Will you sit with me while I draw tonight?" "I don't know if I remember how, but—" He smiled and reached for her hand. "I was hoping you'd ask." That evening, for the first time in years, Clara opened her sketchbook to a blank page. She held her pencil with quiet reverence, like a violin she hadn't played in a lifetime. The lines were shaky at first, unsure, but slowly, steadily, she began to draw. A man's hand resting gently over a woman's, a baby's foot pressing against the inside of a round belly, a wedding bouquet lying abandoned on stone steps. Each line pulled something out of her that words never could. And when she was done, she looked up at Nathan, his eyes watching her like she was the miracle, not the work. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. And in that silence, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in months, maybe years, home. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't sudden. There was no grand announcement or flash of light. Just a moment, quiet and almost forgettable, when Clara stepped out of the car, turned toward the gallery entrance, and realized she had moved without pain. No dragging, no imbalance, no hesitation. She had simply walked. Nathan noticed it before she did. He stood beside her, holding the car door open, and his brows rose slightly as she reached the sidewalk. "Did you feel that?" he asked. Clara paused, blinking. "Feel what?" "You didn't limp." She stilled, looking down at her feet like they might confirm it, as if her body had betrayed the pattern she'd grown used to. She took another step, still steady, still strong. A slow smile spread across her face. "I didn't even notice." "That's the best part," he said. "You weren't waiting for pain anymore." They stood in front of the building, a modest little gallery newly renovated from what used to be an old church annex. It wasn't hers, not yet, but the manager had offered Clara a small wall space for her sketches after seeing a few prints at a community art fair. That alone would have been enough. But then the woman had looked at her, gently, and said, "I think people need to see the kind of strength that draws instead of hides." Clara had taken 3 days to decide. Not because she didn't want it, but because she wasn't sure she deserved to want anything that belonged only to her. But standing here now, with her spine straight and her foot grounded, she realized something had shifted. She was no longer asking permission to exist. Inside the gallery, her drawings hung on a narrow white wall, 6 sketches, framed with soft wood, each one capturing a piece of her journey. The woman alone on the church bench, the limp, the sonogram, the open front door, the hand she held, and the final one, a self-portrait, unfinished, with just enough detail to see a woman mid-step, not limping, not waiting, just moving forward. The small crowd wandered through, murmuring with admiration. No one pointed. No one whispered about her leg or her past. They saw the art. They saw the story. Nathan stood beside her quietly, his presence still as grounding as ever. She turned to him. "Do you think this means I'm healed?" He looked at her with that steady gaze she'd come to count on. "I think you stopped measuring healing by what hurts." She nodded. He always found the words before she could. As the evening wound down, the gallery owner approached and handed Clara a simple envelope. Inside was a check, her first ever for something she'd created. She stared at it like it might vanish. "You sold 2 pieces," the woman said gently. "One couple cried in front of the church sketch, said it reminded them of what they survived last year." Clara's hand went to her chest. "They saw themselves in me." "That's what art does," the woman replied. "It reminds people they're not alone." Later that night, back at the cottage, Clara stood in front of the mirror and slipped out of her shoes slowly. Her feet were tired, her body heavy. But it was the good kind of tired, the kind that came from living instead of surviving. She changed into a soft cotton robe and walked barefoot across the wood floor. No wince, no pause. Just a woman moving through space that belonged to her. Nathan sat on the couch, reading. When he looked up and saw her, he smiled. "You float now, you know that?" She laughed. "You said that about me before the limp, too." "I meant it both times," he said. She walked over and sat beside him. He didn't reach for her hand. She reached for his. They sat like that, fingers laced, the room dim and still. Then she whispered, "I think I want you to be there when the baby comes." He didn't move, didn't react loudly. He just nodded. "Then I will be." She leaned her head on his shoulder and said the rest into the quiet. "And maybe if you still want to, I think we could talk about what comes after. United States. Real us." He kissed her forehead. "We already started." That night, she fell asleep to the rhythm of 2 heartbeats, one beside her, one inside her, and a future no longer wrapped in fear. In the morning, she would keep walking, and no one would ever measure her by how she moved again. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on General Common Tales. If you saw a bride limp down the aisle and her groom walk away, would you have stood up like Nathan did? Tell us in the comments.